What if I told you that Ukraine effectively destroyed between 27 and 37.5% of Russia's shadow fleet?
That one
with a
carefully planned strike by the Ukrainians might very well have set a significant part of the Russian Dark Fleet out of commission, with only a third of their ships being hit, with none of those ships being sunk, with no naval blockade having been declared, or with any confrontation with NATO having occurred to date. It sounds almost impossible, but bear with me, because once you understand what exactly took place, you will realize why this could be the brightest moment of the war. War, in most cases, means tanks and missiles for most people. However, the money angle has always been at play too when it comes to Russia. And not just any money, oil money. Because without the oil money, Russia doesn't just suffer, it bleeds. From day one of the sanctions, the Russians knew they had a problem. The West capped prices on oil imports, denied insurance to ships transporting the oil, limited maritime services to facilitate the transportation of the oil, and worked to starve them of the money that powers their war machines. However, Russia didn't give up. Rather, it created something passive, inconspicuous, highly dangerous, also known as the shadow fleet by current analysts. This was no armada of warships. This was a loophole on water. Used tankers acquired at low prices worldwide, registered ships under shell companies, flags appeared to have switched overnight, legal ownership obscured in layers of documentation, the insurance coverage which was only barely acceptable and routes that escaped observation whenever possible. These ships were transporting Russian oil that would then reach consumers prepared to turn a blind eye, mostly in the Asian, Middle Eastern, or African continents. Each barrel that reached its destination meant more funds for Putin. For a long time, this strategy succeeded. Western politicians griped, pundits sounded the warning, and the oil kept pumping. The Russian Union adapted, the shadow fleet expanded, and Moscow suddenly started acting as if they'd figured out the sanctions puzzle. But the thing that most people did not notice about that story is that a system such as this appears formidable until one considers how vulnerable it actually is. Because ships don't operate in a vacuum. They require ports, they require loading terminals, they require storage tanks, they require maintenance yards, they require havens where no more than the minimum of questions are asked. And Ukraine knew something important. If you can't knock out the ships, knock out what they depend on. Therefore, rather than pursuing tankers across the high seas, which would have presented potential dangers, escalation, and even more complications, the target was different. Quietly, right? According to various reports, Ukrainian strikes had focused on critical oil infrastructure that was tied to shadow fleet activities. Not random targets, not symbolic targets, but very specific terminals, depots, and loading points that had seen a disproportionate volume of traffic from the shadow fleet. To begin with, the initial appearance of the damage was not apocalyptic. No giant fireballs, no dire sinking ships, no immediate collapse. And that is why most people ignored this matter. But then something strange began to happen. Because the tanker started idling. The ports began denying access. The health insurance coverage disappeared quietly. Maintenance schedules disintegrated. And overnight, dozens of ships were suddenly operational, but of course, useless. The takeaway that most headlines got wrong is, a ship does not have to be sunk to be disabled. If a tanker cannot dock safely, if insurance won't touch it, if the ports do not want the legal risk that comes with custody of, if crews cannot firmly promise a fix, that ship might as well not exist. Analysts now say that anything from 20 to 35% of the shadow fleet may be directly or indirectly dependent on the infrastructure that's been attacked. The attacks on its energy infrastructure are a serious warning to the new Kremlin administration that's not a dent. That is system shock. Think about what that means. Exports of oil decline. Transport prices escalate. Customers expect bigger bargains. Transportation schedules are no longer dependable, and with every passing day, money is wasted. Russia can reroute the packages, sure. It can attempt different ports, it may coerce other players to collude, but nothing like that happens quickly. There's none of that comes cheap, and all of that is not guaranteed. But while Russia is scrambling, Ukraine is buying time, and this is precisely what it needs. Also, there is the second component that makes the strike even more perilous for Moscow: trust. The shadow fleet can only function if all parties concerned believe the risk can be handled. The minute the port authorities, insurers, or the buyers think, this is not worth the trouble, the whole thing breaks down. But fear spreads even faster than any missile. One supply chain problem leads to another. A denied port causes pause in other ports. Each canceled insurance creates a ripple effect. Suddenly, the fleet which appeared so enormous on paper now seems pathetically small. And here's the part that should really grab your attention. Ukraine accomplished this without overshooting the red line. There were no NATO ships involved, no international waters were blockaded, no direct attack on non-combatant ships. From a legal and strategic viewpoint, it was very hard for Russia to react without escalating in a manner it cannot afford to do so. In fact, this is not purely military thinking. That's economic warfare at its best. What about the world at large? They are quite large compared with how people think of them. When Russian oil shipments become less dependable, the end result is seen on the global market. Prices go up and down. Interested parties become alarmed, governments begin to take notice once again, and sanctions, which had been dismissed as leaky, suddenly matter again. This has many implications, and it also sends signals that extend far beyond Ukraine. The modern war no longer revolves around weapons alone. It's about systems, and systems have weak points. A worldwide trade backlash is all it would take. You don't need the largest navy in the world to accomplish this. You require intelligence, patience, and timing. This strike specifically in Ukraine proves that the country has the capability of fighting smarter rather than harder. It reveals a weakness that Russia can't do much about, and that's why this is so important. Indeed, because if Ukraine can replicate this strategy, if it can continue to strike at economic lifelines rather than symbols of frontline strength, then the balance of pressure gradually shifts, quietly but irreversibly. Did Ukraine really disable a third of Russia's shadow fleet with just one attack then? Not in the dramatic sense. No ships exploding, there was no wreckage on the sea. But functionally, very possibly yes. And in the modern warfare, function trumps appearance every single time. This wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy. It could, on the other hand, be remembered as being among the most significant developments in the conflict. If this analysis has been helpful for you, please like this video. This will help more people view it. Subscribe for more insightful storytelling analysis on worldwide conflicts.
And if you think Russia will simply rebuild its shadow fleet and move on, this is where the story takes a much darker turn. Because replacing ships is one thing, replacing trust, access, and time is something else entirely. On paper, Russia can buy more tankers. There are always old ships for sale somewhere in the world. But here's the problem nobody in Moscow likes to talk about. The Shadow Fleet was never just about ships. It was about relationships. Ports willing to look the other way, insurers ready to take legal risks, crews prepared to work under questionable conditions, and buyers confident that deliveries wouldn't suddenly disappear. Once those relationships are shaken, they don't come back easily. After the strikes, risk calculations changed overnight. Ports that once quietly accepted Shadow Fleet tankers started asking uncomfortable questions. Insurance companies, already nervous, pulled back even further. And buyers began demanding deeper discounts, not because they wanted to, but because they could. And that's where the real damage shows up. Every extra dollar discounted is a dollar not going to the Kremlin. Every delayed shipment strains cash flow. Every canceled contract creates political pressure back home. Russia can try to absorb that pressure, but it's already stretched thin. The war is expensive, the economy is under sanctions, recruitment costs are rising, and domestic expectations haven't gone away. Now add something else to the mix: timing. This disruption didn't happen during a calm period. It hit while Russia was already juggling multiple crises: military, economic, and diplomatic. That matters, because systems under stress break faster than stable ones. Ukraine didn't need to win outright. It just needed to push. And that push forced Russia into defensive mode, reacting instead of planning. There's also a strategic message here, and it's not just aimed at Moscow. It's aimed at everyone watching. If Ukraine can disrupt oil flows without blockades, if it can weaken revenue streams without escalation, then similar tactics become thinkable elsewhere. That makes global trade more cautious. It makes neutral actors more careful, and it raises the cost of doing business with sanctioned states everywhere. That's why this wasn't just a tactical strike. It was a signal that the rules have changed, a signal that shadow systems are no longer safe just because they're hidden, and a signal that economic warfare is entering a new phase. Now here's the uncomfortable question. What happens if Ukraine does this again? Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. Each strike doesn't need to be decisive. It just needs to add friction. Friction slows systems. Slowed systems bleed money. And bleeding money weakens wars. Russia still has options, but they're worse than before. More expensive, more risky, and less reliable. And that's the definition of strategic pressure. So when people ask whether this strike really mattered, they're asking the wrong question. The real question is this: how many times can a system built on shortcuts survive being exposed? Because once the illusion of safety is gone, everything becomes harder. And that's why this moment matters. Not because of what sank, but because of what stopped working. If you want to understand modern war, this is it. Not explosions, but disruptions. Not headlines, but pressure. And if you want to see where this conflict is heading next, keep your eye on the quiet moves. The ones that don't look dramatic at first, but change the game over time. If you're finding these breakdowns valuable, hit like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and keeps this analysis coming. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Russia adapts, or are these cracks only going to widen? Thanks for watching.